Next up, we celebrate mastering. The guys who, it's an art and a science and a little bit of alchemy in there too. Our inductee this year is Mr. George Ingram from NRP. When I was interviewing George, he said, I think we've cut, I said, just in sheer numbers, you've probably cut more discs than anybody that I know with your entire team. He said, well, we kind of calculated it was probably about 200,000. I personally think that's a little light. And we did some calculations, and that means they've cut a groove 8 times around the earth. George has done a lot of pioneering efforts, and some of the things I was involved with mastering for a while, and I know what they did now that I fully grasp after the interview what they were talking about. It's mind-boggling what they've done. But with Jack White and Wesley Garland, they did cut the fastest record in the world from the time they did the session with the cutting to getting it plated, pressed, labeled, and back and sold, which means they had to take money in hand to do it. It was 3 hours, 55 minutes, and I think 21 seconds by the time that was all done. And he's going to talk about some of this in the interview. Some of us kind of skip ahead some of this stuff in here. But it's a fascinating operation. Vinyl has made its kind of comeback now, so that we're back in the heyday of that, and a new group of engineers learning that trade. So let's go ahead and watch George.
Bear in mind that on a 12-inch LP, if it's like 20, 21 minutes long, that groove is a continuous groove going from the outside in. That groove can be a half a mile long. Yeah. So you multiply that out, it's like, you know, well, maybe we cut a groove all the way around the earth. I really don't know.
George, tell us about how you got to Nashville. I think you were born here.
Well, yes, a rarity, a native Nashvilleian in the music business. And I actually started in the business right around 1966 in a plating shop over on Chestnut Street with a guy named Henry Kemp. And that is where I met Ken Place, the owner of Nashville Record Productions. And during that time I worked at the plating shop. I got to know Ken rather well and was able to do some tape editing for him. And when I saw the tape machines and the lathes, I fell in love. And I knew that's what I wanted to do. And so I worked part-time for Ken and then started full-time in 1968 and worked for Ken until his death in 1970. Upon his passing, I became CEO or manager of Nashville Record Productions. And fortunately, 2 years later, in 1972, I was able to buy stock in the company and became president and CEO of Nashville Record Productions.
You know, so I don't know what George talked to you about, but when I'm asking him, hey, how'd you get involved in this, all this stuff, you know, his brother ran the plating shop. He worked in plating for a while, and then he learned how to do cutting. And did he tell you the story about doing the cutting for the Grand Ole Opry radio? For that to be your entry into this whole world of, hey man, there is a schedule. This needs to happen. You need to knock it out. Every week, this train doesn't stop rolling. That to me is incredibly impressive.
We kind of set out to be the first in a lot of categories. Number one, we were the first mastering studio in Nashville to have a sit-down mastering console. And that console was a Shear designed by Don McLaughlin. Then we moved on to a string of number ones for the Nashville music business, including we were the first hard disk-based editing system in Nashville. Everybody else was using the Sony U-matic tapes. We were the first ones to bring that online. And then during all this time where we were doing these other number one things, we also strung together, and I was really fortunate, strung together a whole series of number one hits, including Crystal Gale, Don Williams, Charlie McCoy, folks like that used us on the mastering. Multi-groove record. It is a horse racing record, and on each side of the record there's 6 individual grooves. And in those 6 grooves, there's a different winner to the horse race. So it is kind of a game where you spin the record and it's random drop because you've got 6 grooves, one starting at different circumferences around the record itself. So there's 6 tracks on the A side, 6 tracks on the B side, so there's 12 potential winners. And it was quite a successful campaign. You know, we found through the years that that if somebody came in and wanted a special project, we took a look at it and just like, well, you know, is this something that not only we can make for him, or is it something that might be appealing to the rest of the industry? And I mean, the multi-groove record was great. We went on into getting some government contracts with the U.S. Army, doing some vinyl for them. And during that interim time, while we were doing it, we had an opportunity to, through a company called Nashville Compact Disc here in Nashville, because we were into the digital age then, to do a complete restoration on the V-disc, which were the World War II discs that was sent to the soldiers in the field over in Europe. We also did got into doing live direct-to-disc records at Third Man Records here in Nashville. We took over to Third Man a Scully lathe, which was originally owned by King Records in Cincinnati. It was in 1955. We did complete restoration on the lathe, and we kept it original. We did not go in and put computers on it. We made it exactly like it was when it came from the factory in 1955. Of course, we did do a stereo updated cutter head, but basically the system is just like it was when it came from the factory.
George and my boss, Jack White, the owner of Third Man Records, had talked, had theoretical talks about doing live disc recording. And as I understood it, George had said, well, yeah, if you build a room for it, I'll bring the lathe over. But to me, how cool, how amazing, what a wonderful person of George and NRP that he's got more lathes than he has space for, that he just has an extra lathe lying around. Oh yeah, we can put this at Third Man and we'll just use it when we're recording live stuff.
Part of a record release for Third Man was the Lazaretto project. And in that Lazaretto project, several key factors was, number one, we did the world's fastest record. From the studio to the manufacturing, to the sale of a record. In 3 hours and 55 minutes, 21 seconds, give or take a little there, we made a record from the very start to the very end, including the mastering, the plating, the pressing, taking a record over to the Third Man and actually selling a copy, which constitutes a record release.
Worth mentioning, the night before rehearsals, George is there setting up everything, getting everything rolling, and he blew his stereo cutting head. And there's, I mean, this is, audio engineers might understand this, but you try to explain to people in the outside world, like, okay, well, let's just go get another cutter head. Like, they don't have them on a shelf at Target, Yeah, they're expensive.
But there was as they were doing the live thing, rehearsal, there was a signal that was a bit too hot, blew up the cutting head, and we figured out what caused it. And luckily we had an extra spare cutting head. Everything was working fine, and we got done with side A, and I picked up side A, put it over to the side, and started the side B. Side B went perfect, and that was our first live direct-to-disc. And once it was over, it was such a relief that we had done it. With an audience watching us.
Yeah.
Now, in that same Lazaretto project, we did several different things to it, kind of as gimmicks. We actually did some cutting up under the label, so you could actually play the label. Sounded like hell, but I mean, you could play the label. It was also 3 speeds, 33 1/3, 45, and 78. It also contained a matte finish on one side, like an old 78. That particular side was cut from the inside out, It also had the dual groove, lock groove, etching in the run-out grooves, including a hologram on the inside of the record. And I mean, that was really a gimmick record. And the great thing about it, the music was good too. So it had a lot of gimmicks, but it had good music. And the record sold well. And it was one of the fastest sellers on the Nielsen scans.
You also pioneered the etchings.
Well, yes, the etching disc, and I forgot to mention that. The etching disc was quite unique in that I had a label called Vortec out of New York call me on the phone, and she said, I talked to an engineer that I knew, and he said he couldn't do it. But if there was anybody that could do it, that I could do it. And I'm not sure whether that's a blessing or a curse.
Well, explain what the etching on the disc is.
The etching on the disc is where the customer creates their exact artwork that they want on. In this particular instance, we used a process because the label wanted it to where it had texture and feel to it. So if you rubbed your hands across it, you could actually feel it. And in some cases, we've done that etching where it's been embossed into the record and debossed where it's on top of the record. And the way we did that is, I can't tell you all the process or I have to kill you, but it's very, very similar to silk screening or letterpress where you're making direct contact with the acetate, with the actual inks and stuff that are being used, which were very special. The preparation of those master lacquers that were going into the plating to make the die stamps. There's a lot of special things that went into it. And it's quite unique, and I still do them today.
And I think probably originally he was an intern, was Wes Garland.
Yes, Wes Garland came to me in 2008, and Wes stalked me for a while, and he was just kind of like a wet-nosed puppy.
So what happened was Mike Poston actually referred me to George Ingram, and so I gave him a call, and he said, this is Nashville Record Productions, and I'm like, hey, this is Wes Garland, I'm a mastering engineer, and his first response was, well, I guess we both have the same problem, don't we? And right away I liked him. I mean, that was the coolest response, and he said, well, we could probably show you around one of these days, and so that was kind of the end of that conversation. And I kept calling, and no one would answer. So I knocked on his door one day, and he's like, "Oh, you're the one that keeps calling me. Come on in. I'll kind of show you how it works." And so I thought it was the coolest thing to see a disc cut. He gave me a demonstration. He could tell that I was really amazed by it, and he's like, "I can't promise you anything, but I can pay you a little bit to do this and this. We get a little bit of work every day." And so I stuck around, and been there ever since. He's the coolest guy ever to work for.
And I really got to like Wes. And at that point in time, the vinyl business was coming back. So I thought, well, let's give the guy a try. And Wes came on board with us and did an excellent job. I mean, his heart really is, he's kind of like me in that when he first saw the equipment and was actually able to use it, I couldn't run him away from the place. And Wes interned with me, and then I, put him on full time, promoted him up to well, other than me, one of the head mastering engineers at NRP. And in 2015, I decided that I wanted to retire. And so at that point in time, I had several offers to sell the company. But since Wes had been so devoted and had at that point had been with me 10 years, well, actually 8 years, I'm sorry, I gave him first opportunity. And so Wes and I And we sat down and worked out a deal, something that we could both live with. And he's had it since 2015. We've kind of reversed roles now. I work for him kind of on an intern basis. If he needs me, I work, like the live shows and special projects and stuff. And I wish Wes all the success in the world.
The amazing thing about George is he's great with people. He understands equipment and engineering, and no one can break the ice with people like George.
When George told me that this award was coming up, I thought there's no more appropriate designation award for him, because I truly get the feeling that he has dedicated his life to music and specifically to vinyl record cutting. So all the congrats in the world. I'm very, very happy to have been a part of this.
George, you deserve this award, and it's an amazing accomplishment, and it's well deserved.
Anything else you want to toss out there?
Well, yeah, there is. I'll say to all the younger people that never let a challenge go out of your studio. If somebody comes in and gives you some quirky idea, don't immediately dismiss it, because there's always those hidden treasures that if you think about it hard enough, work on it hard enough, just because it hadn't been done before, don't mean it can't be done.
The day my mama socked it to the Harper Valley PTA.
Now, unless she has already spilled the beans to George, I want Elaine, George's wife, to come down here to present this, because she's been in the front office all these years working the front end while he's been working the back end. So please welcome Elaine Ingram. All right, George, your turn.
Better late than never. More for putting up with who knows what.
Well, you deserve a lifetime achievement award
For putting up with you.
Well, that was a surprise.
You have the floor. You have the floor.
I have the floor. Well, I'd like to start out with thanking the Country Music Hall of Fame for letting us use this facility. They donated. Of course, the Audio Engineering Society of Nashville for presenting me with this Lifetime
I know you
Achievement
don't use
Award.
microphones in what you do, but would you move right over here?
Yes,
Now
dear.
you can
Yes,
start.
dear. Okay. Yes, dear. I get told that a lot. You don't know what you're doing over there. You're just a cutting guy. But yeah, it's been a lot of fun, and it's been a nice career. It's been challenging. There's days where you run from the studio going, "Stop it, you can't make me do this anymore," because it's driving me crazy. But overall, a lot of fun. I'd like to thank all of my family who come and helped in the studio when we needed them, because we were also doing some packaging and other stuff. So it's just a big thank you, and thanks for all y'all coming. Johnny Rosen, all the guys. We love the music business, and I guess when we pass away, we'll go to that big recording studio in the sky. Thank you very much.